We will have I will do a short introduction, then we will welcome the panelists on stage, and I will ask introductory questions of them, after which we open up for questions from you all, which I have help in selecting which one we will actually address up on stage. It is increasingly clear that if we are to succeed with our common mission of halting and reversing tropical deforestation, that is an issue that has a protection component and a production component, and both are equally important. On the protection side, we have a fairly good visibility on what works. We need more protected areas. We need better tenure, larger areas with the title for indigenous communities and local communities, indigenous peoples worldwide. We need payment for ecosystem services, and we need enforcement of laws. However, this session will focus on the production side, and if all that good public policy action on protection is to be viable politically, we absolutely have to succeed with the production as well. There needs to be a better, more appealing, more equitable, stronger growth model for rural development. And for that to happen, we need a step change in how we organize our food system, how we produce. We need innovation. What's the photovoltaic solar of the land use space, so to speak. And we need investments. We need massive investments. To catalyze those investments, we need to do a number of things which will be discussed here. I think one thing that we absolutely need to do is to close the forest frontier, because that will trigger innovation in itself by stopping the practice of making the frontier cheap. We set the stage for innovation and new modes of production. We also need policies and regulations and the finance. And studies have shown, like the Business and Sustainable Development Commission report, the new climate economy report, that with the right financial structures and policies, investing in forests could represent a huge business opportunity. There are a range of vehicles and instruments which use development capital to make forests more investable, land use more investable for commercial investors, and these need to be scaled and replicated. We will focus on that with a special focus on Colombia towards the end. As I said, we have an extraordinary panel to help us clarify these issues, and I will ask the panelists now to go onto stage. First, Juliana Santiago, head of the Amazon Fund from the Brazilian Development Bank. Then Nanno, Kleiterp, former CEO of the Dutch Development Bank FMO and currently chairman of the board of the Andgreen Fund. Bas Rüter, director of sustainability of Rabobank. Heidi Finskas, vice president corporate responsibility for KLP. And Claudia Martinez, director for E3 Ecologia, Economia y Etica. Excuse my pronunciation. So let's start with Juliana. The logic here is that we move from very concessional finance, the Amazon Fund, through to concessional finance directly aimed at working with the corporate sector to catalyze private investments, and then over to more traditional financial institutions to get a certain logic of the flow of the discussion. And then Claudia will talk towards the end about how to apply this all to the Colombia situation and its very high ambitions. So Juliana, with the 10-year anniversary of the Amazon Fund this week, what are some of the lessons learned?
Yes, a lot of lessons learned, actually. Yeah. So I think this panel is it's a timely opportunity to discuss what we've been thinking now and what are the stage that the Amazon Fund is and how these connect to the blended finance agenda. So just to give you a brief idea of this 10 years history, the fund started in 2008, having its first projects in 2009. And by that time, we focused particularly in creating a portfolio. So we had more projects that were smaller or more in a pilot model to test how we could develop a forest-based economy, how we could strengthen the institutions that have been working in the Amazon for long times, but not with enough resources and not in a structured manner. So this was the first phase of the fund, to create this portfolio and to identify which institutions were working in the Amazon and would be potential partners to the fund. Then in 2012, we made a deeper analysis and thinking about what we could do more in terms of reaching the ground and reaching more local institutions and giving capillarity to the fund in an essence that the resources could be used in a more organized way in one side, but also coordinated and thinking about linking those institutions to give more scale. So we made in 2012 our first call to submission to projects that had the objective to select institutions that would work as agglutinating institutions, meaning that they would create and bring inside the projects a networking of institutions that would work implementing the projects on the ground, the sub-projects, and these agglutinating institution would work more as an institution that would first be responsible to managing the project and accounting for it to the bank, and also coordinating all the activities in order for them to get integrated. And I think this was very successful strategy, because after we changed this strategy to look for more structuring projects in a more large-scale perspective, we have reached around 350 institutions through those projects. And we have committed almost 500 million reais, which represents approximately $200 million, just for you to have an idea. So this strategy we can consider was very successful. But now in 2017, we of course are always in an evolving process, and we came to the conclusion that those projects, it was a right moment to think about changing them from projects to small businesses, and to think about how we could give more sustainability to those projects and how to scale up the results. And that's when we started to participate in a lot of forums and discussions with other actors and private sector and institutions that were willing to get engaged in a positive impact investment agenda. And actually we found that this ambience and this environment existed already. And those institutions actually were seeking for opportunities in identifying projects on that nature. And we also were very happy to see that those institutions understood the importance of the forest as not only as to mitigate climate impacts, but also an opportunity to incorporate the social aspect of social inclusion, income generation, but also link those communities, those small businesses to the consumers, and so on and so forth. So that's in this process we came to the agenda of blended finance and identify that the Amazon Fund, and as also as other instruments of grants or development finance, of philanthropy funds, could match with other types of funds and private resources that were available in order to leverage and more funds, and also to incorporate the logic of business in these projects. So this is now the moment we are, and I can go back and go deeper on these possible structures that we've been seeing as opportunities to the fund.
Okay. Well, perhaps you could expand a little bit of sort of one way you see forward regarding a specific public-private blended finance opportunity for the Amazon Fund.
Yes. For example, specifically to the Amazon Fund, we are exploring some very promising possibilities. One of it is to develop an ecosystem of entrepreneurship and innovation that the funds that comes from grants and philanthropy can be used to support technical assistance for those small institutions, or even the medium and bigger institutions that have been working in the Amazon, and also to engage them in the logic of acceleration of businesses. So we are thinking about the structures that can integrate incubators, accelerators, fund managers, and many others to create possible structures that the grant has its role, but also the private capital can also have a role, having, of course, more appetite for risk, because they also have appetite and the intention to invest in more sustainable and impact projects. So this is one of the possibilities of matching funds. But there are other possibilities that are more formal. So we are thinking about structures that we could create two funds, one that would raise funds from the private sector and looking for different scales of risk and return, and having the patient capital as part of this, but also the investors that wanted to take less risk but are willing to invest. And the Amazon Fund resources would come in a mirror fund with its nature of grants, but linked to a more long-term and deeper structure in terms of sustainability. And we would coordinate our resources and our investments to those projects that were identified as potential investments to be scaled up and give some return.
Brilliant, exciting prospects indeed. So Nanno, chairman of the Andgreen Fund, full disclosure, Norway has invested in the Andgreen Fund. Can you tell us a bit more about the Andgreen Fund and how this kind of blended structure can help attract investors?
Yes, of course. Well, I was thinking already what Juliana was saying. It's the kind of funds he wants to create. I think part of it maybe is there. So let's talk about it later on. Yes, so the Andgreen Fund was established last year. We are really up and running and have the team in place in Brazil and Indonesia and Africa. and are looking at doing transactions. The Andgreen Fund was created. It was an initiative, an idea of, in reality, of PAIR and IDH. That really we have to focus on the private sector. Private sector, I would say, the main driver of deforestation in the supply chain of the big commodities, the big companies, but also the smallholders. So how can we provide them with finance and see that they stop deforesting? That's basically the idea, that the fund can prove that there is a financial viable model, and that the investments in there can be financial viable. In that sense, this is a first step in of course a longer trajectory. So if we look at the objective of the fund, then I think the most important one is that we aim to preserve 5 million hectares, to preserve, conserve, and restore 5 million hectares of forest. We want to raise $400 million to do that, and with that 400 million, we want to mobilize 1.6 billion of investments in this space. And we want to touch the lives of 500 million small farmers with job creation or income generation with those people. So it is the whole concept of protect, produce, and include. So that is really the concept of the fund. Where are we at this moment with the fundraising? So we have 125 million, that's Norwegian money, and Unilever already accepted to step in, and we hope in the coming year to close at, well, probably next year, to close at the 400 million. What is very special about the fund, and what I think is also a very strong part of the fund, is the jurisdictional approach. The fund can only operate in jurisdictions that have a clear target on stopping deforestation and that have a monitoring system to follow that. So the structure is, we have an advisory board where the contributors are in and independent people, and they approve the jurisdiction. The jurisdictions that we have approved already are in Brazil, Mato Grosso, we're looking at Pará, in Indonesia, South Sumatra, East Kalimantan, Jambi, and in Africa, Liberia. We also, let's say, can operate already in Ecuador, and looking at Peru and Colombia and other states in Latin America. So that's, let's say, the fund is focused on all the places where there is tropical forest. But this jurisdictional approach helps very much in two ways. First of all, it helps, of course, in the discussions with the local governments to convince them of taking those steps, because then the fund can invest and the fund can bring other investors with it, because I will explain the products that the fund provides. And for the companies, it's also attractive, because then if it's clear for their reputation, they are helping and are supporting the region, the plan of the regional and maybe sometimes the national government. So how does the finance work? So we are now in discussion in Brazil and Indonesia with companies, and then the first thing we look at is the environmental return. So the environmental return is the contribution to our targets of the 5 million hectares protected and restored, and the 500,000 smallholders, let's say, supported. No? So we look at what is the impact that the company, the project of the company we will finance, can have there. So that's about intensification of production. An example is a company in Brazil, livestock, where they try to change, they will change their model of having one cow on 3 hectares to 3 cows on 1 hectare. No? So really intensification, and keep off the pressure on further deforestation, and to show that that model is viable financially and sustainably, and that others can copy the model. So we can provide that company with high-risk capital, so long-term capital, 10, 15 years, which in the market isn't available, and then we take the highest risk in order to reduce the risk of other financiers that come in. Because that is key, the fund, in order to leverage and to get others in, it can only finance 25% of a project. So we need other financiers to get in the projects where we step in. Then the fund, let's say what we promise to the contributors of the fund, that they can get their money back. Of course, we're aiming to make a return in order to show that we could have a second fund where we can also get development banks in, more commercial investors in. But so really it is, let's say, keeping the capital intact, not giving donations, but that gives, of course, the possibility to give more to concessional finance and to take much higher risk than other parties that are available. The issue is to show it. What we see already, that it's very limited, the number of parties that are really investing in this space. You know, in the sustainability, in stopping deforestation, in agriculture. If you look at in the commodities, in the space that they are really investing long term. Of course, no, the finance of the commodities is there, but also development banks like IFC, like I know the European development banks are very hesitant to step in. That's because of the high risk, but that's also because of the reputational risk. So we hope that showing this model that it can work, and with the activities of Andgreen, that we can show them that this can be done, and that they can accompany us in financing these projects. Maybe for the moment that's...
Excellent. You covered my follow-up question in your initial response, so I will move to Bas. So you are here because you are a bank, but also because Rabobank has moved into the sort of semi-concessional space as well, sort of crossing over from the classic banking world to thinking about new ways of doing things. And I think we would like your perspective on both. What are the conditions under which mainstream Rabobank business can invest in deforestation-free agriculture and forestry on the one hand, and what are your thoughts on the various blended finance vehicles that you have been are being involved in?
Well, thanks, Per, and thanks for providing the opportunity to explain what we're doing, and hopefully also work together with people who are interested in the same sphere in the near future. 1 minute on the bank, not to sell it, but to make you understand why we're here. A cooperative bank, 125 years old, started on the countryside in the Netherlands because farmers couldn't get finance from the rich bankers in the city. That's the problem of 125 years ago, steered after Mr. Raiffeisen. You probably know Raiffeisen banks in other countries as well. Those were the days when people had different worries and the communities had different problems than today, but definitely climate change, deforestation, loss of biodiversity are today's global problems and challenges for us all. And we have identified the need as a bank who is big in food and agriculture worldwide to be part of those challenges today as well. And it is not just a responsibility, but it's also an opportunity, because we operate in over 40 countries in the world, and we have over 100 billion US dollars in exposure in food and agriculture worldwide, out of which 30 in the Netherlands, but 70 abroad in primary production, financing over 80 million hectares of land. So we are able to push the needle in the right direction if we actually make it attractive for our clients to work. And I hope, yes, this is the slide I was about to show, to be able to also show that this is partly also in tropical areas where we can actually move the needle in a number of commodities. So our aim is both in financing farmers, financing trading commodity finance, so traders, and in financing food companies to move the needle in the supply chain. Because within the supply chain things will go right or wrong, and because we know these people throughout the chain, we can actually influence to change their behavior. Last year we launched what we called Growing a Better World Together, which is the program under which we want to make that contribution to protect biodiversity and to lower the contribution of food and agriculture worldwide to the climate problem. The Kickstart Earth, which was the first part of that launch, was to set up a partnership with UN Environment and to jointly make $1 billion US available to actually move this agenda on forest protection and sustainable agriculture. Now, because of the fact that we have 500 billion on the balance sheet, we can actually easily set aside money to work in this space. But as Nanno said, and that's also why we work with Nanno and his direct colleagues intensively, there are risks associated that you cannot take on your balance sheet. We don't finance a regular farm in Brazil longer than 7 years, given specific risks. Elsewhere, we can't promise our clients to pay back the loan. As a result, we need to work with public funders and partners to do so. Also, banks are not people to prepare projects, to prepare business cases. We work with people who then come to us for financing. So we committed to $1 billion US, out of which we think 700 million can be done by the bank itself. 250 needs to come from soft money, and 50 million needs to be real grants. We will not be able to participate in the grant as a for-profit company, even though a cooperative, but we will invest in the fund itself. So we actually made a decision earlier this week to invest 50 million out of the 250 in the fund, in addition to the 700 million we will do as senior debt in those projects. But we need public money in addition to that, and we want to make it interesting to invest in the fund structure that I just described by giving different solutions for people with a different risk appetite. That's why we have junior notes that are available for donors who are not interested in a return but want to make maximum leverage on their public money using private money to speed up. We will add a mezzanine note for development banks who have a return profile but who are able to provide long money at a lower rate. And we have a senior note for impact investors and other banks who want to use the fund but are also able to use their balance sheet with it. So we set up a scheme. We think we are able to attract the interest of our clients, and because of the relatively large client base, we think we are able to move the needle quickly. And we all think, I think in this room, that things are not happening fast enough. If we talk about food and agriculture, about forest protection, then a lot can be done. We have this 17 million hectares of land in Brazil of the farmers we finance. If we are able to help them to reforest under the commitments of the forest law much faster than in the next 30 years, we are able to plant a lot of trees quickly. If we are able to use degraded land, as Nanno described as well, with the large farmers and the large traders we finance, we will be able to sequester carbon and to lower the pressure on the forests that are remaining. In addition to that, working in Indonesia with smallholders and forest protection next to the production areas, we will be able, in that whole transition of, for instance, the palm oil industry, to protect the forests around the primary production areas by enhancing the livelihood of the small farmers, replanting and protecting at the same time. So we have a number of storylines in a number of countries that we're working on today. We are interested and willing to extend those to other crops and to other regions. And we hope to be able to do the first transactions still this calendar year, setting up the fund and working with people who are interested to combine our client base, their knowledge, and the different types of money needed.
Brilliant. I think I'll leave it at that at the moment. Heidi, so you are representing an institution that needs a reasonable rate of return at a reasonable risk, so to speak. So this is certainly non-concessional finance. And I guess the interesting question for us is what kind of structures do you need to see? What kind of structures have you been working on to invest in complicated things, which our agenda certainly is? And how do you see that potentially applying to this agenda?
Yes, you're absolutely right. We need the good rate of return. KLP manages pension money on behalf of municipalities and local governments. So we manage pension money on behalf of nurses and kindergarten teachers, etc., of more than 1 million Norwegians. So we just can't give up any return in that respect. But still, we have a very clear idea that we can do well and do good at the same time. We thought that while we're investing globally, and we thought that we also would like to make investments that have a direct impact on the sustainability agenda. We do sustainability across the portfolio, but also to have a more targeted portfolio that really have explicit and direct impact. That was the idea that we had. So we established a portfolio that we call development investments. And all investments in this portfolio are actually blended finance structures. I think that kind of shows the potential that blended finance structures can have, and that is really the way into the development agenda for mainstream institutional investors like KLP. I thought I would share with you some of the specific examples that were made to perhaps, well, they can perhaps illustrate what is important and the benefits of blended finance to institutional investors. We've decided to invest in two sectors. That is renewable energy and finance. We think that both sectors are key enablers for sustainable development, and are also highlighted as key sectors in the sustainable development goals. So unfortunately, we're not potential investors in the forest agenda as of today. But still, I think that the lessons learned and the mechanisms of blended finance, they are the same no matter what sector you are investing in. Well, first of all, we have established a company, investment company, together with the Norfund, the Norwegian DFI. Because what we early on saw when we thought that we wanted to go do these development investments, we saw that there were limited number of structures, a limited number of opportunities for us, basically. So we started this joint investment company ourselves together with the Norfund. So that was a kind of unique cooperation. There are very few examples of them. FMO, Rabobank are other examples, but in the rest of the world there are very few examples of that. So KLP and Norfund established that investment company to invest in renewable energy projects in developing countries. So that is the way for us to piggyback on the process that Norfund has. They have the experience, they have the expertise, both from the sector as such, but also from developing countries, which are markets that we in KLP don't have expertise or experience from. So, well, the advantage for Norfund again is that they increase their leverage and get double ticket size when KLP gets along. So that is a win-win situation for both of us. We also have a second investment company together with DFIs that is in African banks. Rabobank is one of the investors in this investment company called Arise as well. So is the Dutch DFI FMO and Norfund, as well as a number of other private and public investors. So that is another example of that same type of structure. We also invested in fund structures. First, I could mention the Nordic Microfinance initiative. Again, a number of institutional investors and private investors like KLP. Again, we're Norfund with us. We have NORAD and the Norwegian Ministry for Foreign Affairs that are also part of this collaboration. And the second, the fourth example I want to mention is a new fund called Climate Investor One. It was established last year and is, well, I would say, innovative mechanism in renewable energy. The idea with the Climate Investor One is to provide finance throughout the whole life cycle of a renewable project, from the development phase to construction phase to refinancing phase. In that way, you can get more renewable energy projects built faster. And that way, you can also, by that construction in different phases, you can also attract different types of investors depending on their risk and return appetite. So we have institutional investors like KLP in it. We also have donors that are part of the development phase and providing technical assistance. So I think that is an excellent example and an innovative example of how to construct blended finance structures.
Excellent. Just a short follow-up. When you hear about these various approaches from the panelists that have spoken so far, does that sort of ring true to you in the sense of the kinds of mechanisms that could be relevant to collaborate with for you, hypothetically, of course?
Please repeat the question.
I said, when you hear about the structures, the approaches taken by Juliana and Nanno and Bas and their institutions, does that sort of sound like potential to you from a KLT perspective, hypothetically?
Yes, absolutely. I think there are clear, good examples of how this agenda is moving forward and how it is being created more structures that are able to attract more private institutional investors. I think that goes for the whole development agenda. It's perhaps started with renewable energy and others, but I definitely think that will change the reforestation agenda as well. As I said, we have decided to focus on 2 sectors. We can't spread too widely, but I'm sure that it will attract other private investors as well. But that's really the starting point for private institutional investors to have the structures in place that makes it even possible to do these investments, because that hasn't been the case. And when I say structures, it means that, well, first of all, you have to have the structures that are legally possible to invest in. It must be possible to invest on a certain scale. We can't do these very small investments because that just increases the workload. You have to be able to make investments of a certain scale. And also the risk mitigation, that's perhaps the most, well, I think that would be the key issue, to a structure that would provide the institutional investors the risk mitigations that make the risk level comfortable for investors. And when we're talking, well, what does risk mean? In these investments, we're talking about developing countries, and that means several different types of risks. Some are perhaps the same, or some risks are the same as in any investment or any project, but there are also some risks that are particular for developing countries and that institutional investors internationally perhaps are not used to. So it's everything from financial risk, we're talking about currency risk, we're talking about political risk, construction risk, as these are often greenfield projects, and of course ESG risk, environmental risks, social risks, governance risks. Those are really key risks that we are very concerned about, and that goes for many other institutional investors as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in the forest and land use space, we have a very rich risk profile. I think it's safe to say. Good. So, Claudia, you have a varied background from a country where there is now an exceptionally ambitious agenda. There's just been an election, but the president-elect have said things that indicates there will be a continuation of the work to protect the forests, but also to build the rural economy. Both in light of the policy measures and the policy goals in Colombia, the regulatory regimes that are being put in place, and these remarks about various vehicles, approaches to investing. What potential do you see? What is the way forward to realize the vision of deforestation-free rural growth in Colombia?
Thanks and thanks for the opportunity of being here. Well, let me start by just projecting, if you can, good news about Colombia, which is that the president defined the agricultural frontier. And you started the panel by saying, protection versus production. So when you define the agricultural frontier, you have a clear guideline on where to invest. And I think that's the first good news about Colombia. And so 40 million hectares are dedicated to agricultural land and 60 million hectares to natural forests. So you have clear divisions. Obviously, This is a regulatory scheme. What happens in the ground might be different, but at least you set the target and you set clear guidance to producers. So if you see that, and could you project the next one, you see that, for example, investments in wood, maize, rice, avocado, cocoa, palm, rubber, potatoes, they already know where to invest. And they have a clear definition of land uses, and that obviously will guide their investments. And that will sort of lower the risks of bridging financial capitals to investors. So I think that's the first good news. And then, in speaking about blended finance, we obviously need to start by that, but we need to be much more innovative. And we're being innovative, I think. We're the first, or one of the first countries to set up a carbon tax, supporting carbon markets. And so only last year, and we started it only last year, the Ministry of Finance collected $125 million only in the last 4 or 5 months. And they were able to sort of deviate private sector compensation schemes to forest lands and to production areas. And so more or less the private sector last year invested 25 million in other type of compensation schemes. So that's blended finance, really. It's a different form of blended finance, but that's already there. The second scheme is, obviously, with those revenues, we're investing in something that is called the Peace Fund and the Sustainable Development Fund. And Per, because Norway is putting money in that fund as well. So we have money from the government, from the revenues of the carbon market, revenues from donors, and revenues from loans. So we're able to bridge this capital to return it to the country in terms of sustainable investments. So again, that's the second form of blended finance. The third one, which we're not using, but we could potentially use, is that Colombia is still giving subsidies. And that's the scheme also in Brazil. For example, we had for around 13 years a scheme that was giving sort of the minimum salary to certain families in Colombia to protect forests. And we have other subsidies to give the poor people money to do sustainable production. So if you use those schemes and blend finance, private finance, and other forms of capital to the existing subsidies, I think that could be a potential blended finance scheme. We also have a very good financial service. Colombians, almost 79.9% of the adults have a financial service. And that in a country like Colombia is a huge potential, because in mostly all of the municipalities you have financial services. So when you have financial services, you can do micro-lending, you can do all forms of lending, exercises. And I think we could use that, scheme to do forestry, obviously. And we could have sort of technical assistance, blending capital to support that micro-lending scheme. So the potential to do this blending finance to reach all of the Colombians is amazing. And we also have economic, financial, and regulatory schemes in place which are great. Like, for example, we have an incentive, a forest incentive, which gives 50% of the investment to plant trees for the first 5 years to people willing to do commercial forestry. So that's there, the potential is there. We have an agriculture guarantee fund that is guaranteeing commercial bank risks to the first layer of banks. And so we have the potential to do sustainable investments through that guarantee scheme and to bridge Rabobank investments to Colombia, for example. There is a regulation to force investments in the agricultural sector through agricultural development titles. So banks could choose whether to use their own schemes or to use these agricultural development titles, but they have to invest in agriculture. And agriculture for us is also forestry, commercial forestry. And so obviously we have the scheme in place and we can use it for blended finance. And we also have tax deductions for forests. So if Colombians or foreign investors want to invest in Colombia, they have tax exemptions to sort of bridge this capital. We have a royalty scheme that is transferring money from the petroleum and mining scheme to the forestry or to the environmental scheme. So we have those royalties in place. And we have some economic incentives, like, for example, compensations for biodiversity loss and payments for ecosystem services, and many other sort of economic incentives and disincentives. And we have already tried doing green bonds. 3 of our banks have launched green bonds, not yet for forests, but the potential is there. And so, again, I think with this array of options, we can really think of blended finance options to bridge, private sector investments.
Excellent. Thank you. So we are running slightly behind schedule, not much. So while we start on the questions, I would like the panelists also to ponder a sort of 30-second closing remark with something inspirational or some insight that you have drawn out of this for the final part of the session. But we will go to questions from the audience. Could I have the first question, please? No questions.
No,
There is a question. Okay, question for Nanno. What can you learn from successes and failures for blended finance in other sectors? What makes the land sector different? That's a good question.
That's a great, a great question. I think, as was mentioned already by KLP, there are a lot of other already working blended finance mechanisms. So that's also taken into account in Andgreen. I think what makes the land use sector different, as was Per mentioned, I think it combines all the possible risks that maybe in finance you can have. So that makes it a little bit more complicated to find partners. So what are those risks? No, some of them were mentioned. Well, it's all in developing countries. In most developing countries, legal structures are still not as strong as they should be. Then we are working on land use. We see in a lot of countries that still legislation on land use is lacking behind and is not very strict. Then when the legislation is there, then the implementation of the legislation and the enforcement is a big problem. Well, we are talking about huge areas. No, of course now the whole Global Forest Watch and other satellite systems help a lot in doing the real monitoring. Then let's say it's all related to agriculture, and agriculture. I think Rabobank is quite unique in the sense that it is a very specialized agriculture bank working worldwide. There are not many, if you look at the financial sector is not very active in rural areas in agriculture because you have a lot of risk. Well, does it rain, doesn't it rain, are there drought, things that you cannot control, and that, let's say, especially for small farmers, for them it's difficult to absorb all these risks. Apart from the commodity and the commodity price risk and things like that. So you have a huge combination of risks together. That's also the reason, and I think that's what we learned from the other blended finance, that in the case of Andgreen, we said, well, the first step is not going to commercial investors or providing a commercial return. First, we have to show that it works, that we can find entrepreneurs which are willing to comply with the quite high demanding requirements of Andgreen and of, let's say, the whole world working in forestry and on the best practices, no? Because we are asking a company to declare that they won't do any deforestation. Well, if you're looking at the bear companies, and especially the big traders, which are in direct contact with the smallholders, we see that it's almost impossible for most of the companies working with smallholders to state that there won't be any deforestation. So that's already how do we push the border there. Then we ask them to comply with IFC performance standards. So there are a whole lot of requirements, socially, environmentally, which are key also for commercial investors in order to invest. But we have to find the entrepreneurs. So the first, what we see is that it's very important to find those enlightened entrepreneurs who say, yes, we see that this is the future and this is the future of good business. Which, of course, what helps there is the big companies like Unilever also requiring the same thing. So if you want to sell to those companies, then you have to comply with all those requirements. But at the same time, of course, there are a lot of other companies that still are happy to buy the products related to deforestation. So I think that the basic issue of blending, what we learned is don't go too fast to the market. First show that the model works, show that the return can be made, and then we can include commercial investors, because this land use space is really very different from renewable energy, from the financial sector.
Excellent, thank you. Next question, please. The different vehicles seem to chase same or similar deals. Have you seen enough bankable projects, and what are you doing about pipeline development? I'm tempted to ask here for very brief responses from Juliana and Bas. I think for us as NICFI, this is a very appropriate question. This is a big part of the problem, so it would be interesting to hear, preferably relatively quick, sort of minute and a half reflections. Juliana, you want to go first?
Yes, I can go first. Yes, I think we've seen quite few opportunities already in the Amazon. So there are already some arrangements that consider establishing companies as institutions that works in a network of coordinating actions with cooperatives of local producers. So we have businesses in the line of fishing and in the exploration of some forestry products like açaí, like castanha do Brasil, which is Brazilian nuts. And so there are some products that there is a huge potential in terms of returns. And talking about pipeline development, that's, I think, what's the role that the Amazon Fund, particularly in the Brazilian Amazon, might have, and taking this into consideration in other countries. The grants might play this role in pipeline development, in capacity building support, in technical assistance. So that way you prepare the ambience for transformational process. So definitely I see a lot of opportunities. I think it's also part of the maturity process we've been seeing in the Amazon. So this is not created from one day to the other. So I think this is part of this group of people, actors, stakeholders that has been working within the Amazon and identifying possibilities. Another area that I see a lot of potential is restoration of degraded land due to the commitments Brazil has made in terms of recovering degraded areas, and also this links to the commitment that the private properties and the private property owners have in terms of recovering environmental liabilities to be adherent to the forest legislation. So I do believe that there is a huge opportunity to develop this production chain that is not developed yet. And in this path, actually, last year we launched a call to projects to support restoration in large scale, but focusing in territory and ecological corridors and territory areas to actually to promote this creation of a restoration production chain and focus in huger and bigger territories. So I think there are a lot of opportunities on that.
Oh, good. So essentially, too few, but you're working on it. Yeah.
Yes.
But I guess this is a core issue, especially for your blended finance vehicle that you're working on with you and environment. So is this mostly a question of actually financing the pipeline development, or is it mostly a question of having financial structures that give entrepreneurs a certain reasonable certainty that if they come up with something cool, they will get it financed? Or is it both? I guess obviously both, but what is the balance and key points on this?
I think in our perspective, we have so many clients in the regular agricultural space that if we are able to provide the right incentives, we will find the projects to do it. So, I mean, these 1,500 large farmers in Brazil, they could digest a multiple of the existing financial schemes when they amend their business structure. So it needs to be interesting for them to do the right thing. So to go from monoculture to integrated crop, livestock, forestry systems, to plant the trees faster than in a 30-year period from now. And we see great examples of people who are willing to do so and who are struggling to get the business case in place. So we need this market to be populated by different players working together. So I think Nanno and Andgreen are a great example of, let's say, a dark green specialist kickstarting it from a mission perspective. I think we come from the other end, saying we are a mainstream, large-scale financial player who wants to combine this with solving great, large societal issues. In that combination lies the solution. And if we are able to come up with projects that are stable and managed properly using the financial expertise of a banker and technical assistance from people who understand how to actually make that social impact and make that into a professional proposition, we can go to the pension fund and say, we now proved it, as Nanno described. Let's scale it up massively. And that's, for us, I think, finding attractive ways of de-risking and cheap money to facilitate the transition from the large groups of clients of the bank who are interested but calculate as an entrepreneur whether it's also financially feasible. That is where we need to go. Oh. And I'm truly optimistic, even though we're running out of time as planet Earth, that this is actually feasible. Huh. Speed is the only question here.
Excellent. Actually, Claudia, what are you seeing? Colombia is a country where now a lot of pieces are coming together, and you would think that potential entrepreneurs should be inspired by the situation. What are you seeing in terms of pipeline development, and what do you see as the sort of possible accelerators of that?
Well, pipeline development is always a challenge. I mean, you have seen it in Brazil. So by starting, for example, these sustainable development funds, what they're lacking is projects to invest, like, scalable type of projects. So I think that's always a challenge. But what I'm also saying is new trendy companies, mostly B Corps, sort of investing in new forms of or ventures throughout the country. So you see, for example, restaurants investing in sustainable forest and sustainable production. You see, for example, companies, small holding companies in the Amazon using the forest standing and starting to export commodities from the Amazon. You have scientific research institutions bridging technological skills. For example, the AgroSavia, which is our technological sort of institution, bridging with commercial smallholders and into developing technological packages for their own productions. So starting new ventures. So, I mean, it's not easy, Per. It's not easy because really having accurate, innovative pipelines is something that takes time. But I think we have all the elements in place. We have research institutions, we have technological packages, we have small, big corporations, we have good value chains, and we have financial options. We have the money, really. We just need to have more scalable projects.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize this point because I think we are quite optimistic here, and that's the spirit. But I'm really convinced that we have to look at mechanisms to accelerate the development of projects, because if we don't, we will be stuck that there is sufficient money, but there is a lack of projects. Yeah. Because what we see, if you look at the 2020 initiatives in Latin America, there's about 3 billion investable money available for Latin America for projects already for some years, and I think not more than 500 million has been invested. So the money is there. So it's clear, how do we bring ideas, entrepreneurs together to develop projects? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of ideas are coming from NGOs, but NGOs, with all due respect, are not entrepreneurs. So they can have the ideas and build the ideas, and often very small scale. So there's really an issue on the scalable possibilities, mm-hmm. and there's really an issue of getting more entrepreneurs in this space that believe in it. And that is really a bottleneck. So I think we shouldn't underestimate it when there's money and there's ideas and it will happen automatically. It won't happen automatically. No. So and that what was mentioned also by Bas and by Juliana, we need to cooperate, but we also need to find innovative ways to create a space where ideas and projects really become enterprises. Mm.
Yes, indeed. Bas, did you have another?
One very quick remark. I think part of the good news is that a number of the large companies worldwide are shifting quickly to developing business models, or the necessity and the desire to develop business models that are more climate friendly and more sustainable. Mm. One example, the Soft Commodities Forum, the big traders, agribusiness traders who made the Cerrado pledge, are definitely looking for ways to solve the issues that are attached to that pledge. They would love to work with people who come up with solutions, who can actually do what they promised, and they're not used to it. So there's an increasing demand of large parts of the market who want to change and who want to take responsibility, but look at the people who've been in this field for a longer time to help them out. So, I mean, if you talk about supply and demand, there is definitely demand now. Mm-hmm. Let us supply them with solutions. And then you get scale. These people talk about millions of hectares straight away. So that's where we can actually, but we need to be creative. We need to come up with stuff that they can actually understand, calculate, and make it work. And then I think, and that's different from 5 to 10 years ago, we have a lot more appetite from large-scale companies operating currently completely in the private space. They are calling us, help us out. We don't know how to do it. Well, let's join forces then.
Brilliant. Okay. New question, please. Companies or communities, who benefits from blended restoration finance? Panel reflections on achieving sustainable outcomes. All right, 10-second answers won't do here, so we'll, it's a really good question. Who feels like responding to that in a succinct way?
Let me just get... Yes, actually this is something that we care that a lot.
Yeah.
How to find a balance that you were looking for, transforming projects into businesses, but also you have to respect traditional communities. You have to respect their way of living. So how to balance, but in other way. We still have quite few people living below the poverty level in the Amazon. So I think through respecting the rights, but also identifying opportunities of income generation and connecting those communities to the market in the essence of having an alternative of living. I think this is quite an opportunity that we are seeking, but of course it's always we always have to take care of the safeguards. That's part of this ambience of working in the forest and with a lot of traditional communities being there. So definitely it's a very good question, and it's part of our concerns and thoughts in creating this agenda of blended finance, but also respecting the people that live in the forest in the Amazon.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you. Having been intimately involved in the design of the Andgreen Fund, I think you should have something to say on this, Nanno. I mean, this is essentially, of course, you have to integrate those concerns into the structures that incentivize the behavior of investment managers and the board and so on. How is this dealt with in the Andgreen Fund?
Yeah, well, I think this is, as you say, as you know, Per, in the core of the mission of the Andgreen Fund. So I think, well, the question is, it's companies of communities. If we look, for example, at palm oil, and palm oil in Indonesia, 50% of the palm oil in Indonesia is produced by smallholders. And they also are very involved in deforestation. So it is the blended finance. What we see is to finance companies that are the off-takers of these smallholders, that help these smallholders to improve their production methods and improve their business model, to stop deforestation. So, and those are communities, no, living in the local communities. So I think it's especially there where blended finance is important. So it's not the blended finance is not to help companies. The blended finance is to get to a goal, which is stopping deforestation and getting to and especially stopping deforestation in getting new sustainable, financially but also environmentally business models. And that's, you need companies to get this change, and you need the bigger companies to at scale help communities, help small farmers to change their business models. So I think that's the way we look at it. So an example is, mentioned that we are working and see that we can do something with a big trader in Brazil, in soy, that we will take part of the risk of financing the smallholders, which is a higher risk, in order to help them to change and intensify their business model, and that they stop deforestation. So I think that is the core of the blended finance, is to make that possible.
Yes. Let
Thank
me
you.
just add one thing. Nanno said
Very
about
brief,
this. Yeah,
please.
very brief. Nanno said about the small, and actually this, I just remember, because the cattle raising businesses, if you consider the number of small farmers that are engaged in the production chain of cattle raising, and the opportunities we have there to focus on these small farmers, and not only having them to go to a more sustainable practice, but also how to increase their income generation. That is also part of reduction of forest destruction. So this is a very good point, I think.
Thank you. So, Heidi, of course, being in the renewable space is slightly different regarding these issues, perhaps in particular. But KLP is also a very responsible investor in general. So you have strong sustainability criteria in your general profile. Could you talk a little bit about that, and of course also how you have applied that to your blended finance vehicles?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sustainability is important for the whole portfolio, but perhaps I could mention that we invest in listed companies across the globe as well, and of course many of those are involved in forestry in one way or another. So sustainability from a forestry perspective is of course part of our screening process of the total portfolio, and as well as the topic for engagement or dialogue with selected companies where we see that there are challenges. And when it comes to the impact or the development portfolio, I mean, that relationship between economic viability and return for the renewable company, for instance, and the local community, I mean, that is really the key. So that is, to us, you can't compromise on that. So that has been an important part of selecting partners, really, for development investments. So that's also comfortable with the blended finance mechanisms, because having Norfund with us that we know care about these issues as well, or that's also part of when we did invest in Climate Investor 1, that was an important part of the due diligence process, that we have partners that look at sustainability from a holistic perspective.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more, please. Blended finance for more sustainable land use typically include 20 to 30% public funds. How do you see this share decrease over time? And do the private banks involved have the right incentive to minimize this share? Excellent question.
Excellent.
I think, yes, let's pose it to Bas.
Yeah, that's great. Additionality is a precondition for any public money going in. So I can give you examples. We had a great conference last year. You have a 7-year partnership with World Wildlife Fund, one of which is in Brazil, where we promote integrated crop livestock forestry systems. So that means from large-scale monoculture to integrating cattle and forestry. And we were able to finance a farmer to go from monoculture to ICLF without any public money. Of course, we did it straight away. Using public money is not a source in itself. So as part of the precondition for using public funds, we need to prove additionality, which means, and that is banking technique, but the risk-adjusted rate of return on capital is a very widely used phenomena. We can actually prove that profitability of a loan is never higher in a blended finance than it would be in a regular finance. And we need to be able to prove that to ask for public money. So that's one. There's never more profit. It should be the same on the senior side. Of course, we invest time and energy setting up funds and partnerships, so there is overall less profit, but it's part of our mission to be part of those solutions. But then the second part, and the even more important part, we are at the starting point of doing new large-scale transactions. We will learn over time. These are new things that are building up. If we have track record on a number of years of, say, farmer reforestation in Brazil, and we can actually judge the risk profile better on historical track record, we can decrease the use of public money. And we intend to do so because if we use less public money and the same money is available, we can do more transactions. So we don't want to make more money out of this, we want to scale this up. And that is our interest. So we're not in it to maximize profit, we're in it to maximize the movement without making a loss. And that requires failure in practice to understand where the risks are. We are risk rich. Let us try to de-risk that by simply doing it and using the capabilities we have, being it a TA capability, being it regular banking capabilities, being it working with NGOs who understand well what's going on, working with consultants. So we don't have an incentive to maximize the use of public funding, one, because we're controlled on a transaction level for every transaction, and two, we have more to win in scaling up than to abuse public funds. But we need to be transparent on that, and we need to be controlled on that.
Excellent. Yeah, so this is a key question that we have also spent a lot of time pondering in NICFI, what is worth our investment, essentially. I think a basic criteria is that the fundamental value proposition must be potentially financially viable, and that you can identify the risks that are the reasons for why the investments aren't happening on normal commercial terms, and you have a plan to actually address that over time so that this can scale based on normal private finance. If you don't do that, then you have something that might solve a particular problem, but it certainly isn't scalable. And this seems to be a absolutely key issue. Okay, I think we will move to brief, sort of a minute or so, thoughts from the panelists before I move to closing. And why don't we go in the opposite order of the one we started with? So, Claudia, if you want to go first.
So, what's closing?
Your superior insights on
Inspire us.
what has struck you most in this discussion as operationally interesting?
Well, we really have so many options, really. We can use the pension funds, we can use these financial schemes. We have new investments like, Andgreen, and we're seeing more impact investment funds. And we have schemes within our own countries like Brazil and Colombia. So we really have sort of, we're shifting to a new area where we just need to use the value of markets to create social and environmental benefits. And we really need to move to sort of bridging, I think, the poor, in the case of Colombia, with these amazing incentives to social benefits.
Thank you. Heidi.
I would really hope that KLP's experience and our examples, and also the other examples that have been mentioned by the panel, would inspire other institutional investors to look into these opportunities. As has been mentioned, there are more and more options now, and it is now possible to invest with a good return, as well as have a huge development impact. So to look into more untraditional ways of investing, I would definitely encourage institutional investors to look in that direction for at least for a portion of their portfolio, and to have this collaboration and on collaborative structures where we are open for collaboration with other institutional investors as well. So I hope that is encouraging. So that is the message to institutional investors. To the public sector, our message is that we really appreciate the mechanisms and the partnerships that we have with the public sector, being that either partnerships, being that guarantees that you mentioned in other countries, being that types of first loss mechanisms, or what it can be. And to us, for instance, the partnership with public sector organizations has been, well, it gives us comfort when we operate or invest in challenging markets. So really appreciate those mechanisms, and I think that can be a catalyst for attracting more private capital, absolutely.
Thank you. Bas.
I'm reinforced in the idea that we need to leave our comfort zone, all of us. So we need to build new partnerships outside the people we already know and we've been working with for a number of years. Combine the strengths and understand that some things are better done by others, and then jointly start. If we don't start and we don't have failures in place and we don't have successes, nothing will move. So let us start in new coalitions and let the other then also get the benefit of the doubt. I completely understand that people say, if a bank is in this, is the bank in it to make more money? That's a fair question, but my invitation would be, let us start together, and you can look in detail whether you can trust me, but let us start. And that goes for all of us in the room. Don't stick to your old allies, ignoring the new challenges, but build new partnerships, which is also why it's very good that we're all here to make that possible.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, another part, the fact that the bank is involved shows that there is actually a profit to make. And then we can discuss how we share that profit.
Yeah, that's fair.
Nanno.
Yeah, I think the big challenge is in cooperation, so in combining different are already there, and come to innovative spaces, and speaking the same language or understanding each other's language maybe, because that's what I see in practice when we talk with governments, with private sector, with NGOs, with science. Everybody speaks different languages, and it takes an investment and it takes time to do that, to speak the same language. So I think conferences like this are very important. And then the challenge, I think, is in a conference like this to get a much higher level and percentage of private sector and businesses attending. Because I don't know how many it is, but I spoke to, well, I didn't do a research, but I think it's less than 10%. So let's try, that's then the challenge for you, Per, to get more than 20% of private sector in the next, in your next conference. Because I think it's too much still talk about the private sector without the private sector. The private sector was here present, but it should be even more present.
Good. I accept that KPI for next time. They were invited,
No, I know.
I will accept the challenge, but we all need to make this more interesting for the private sector. Juliana.
Yes. First, I want to apologize to the organization because probably I broke this microphone thing. So I lost here, and so I'll have to speak like this. Something. Okay. So blended finance, I think, at some point, everyone in this panel speak a little bit different, but it seems that we spoke about the same thing, very, very linked. I think no matter what are we doing, and particularly, just now is my earring. But blended finance, I think I took some notes during the panel, and I definitely blended finance can contribute to forest restoration and conservation by increasing capital leverage, enhancing impact, and delivering risk adjustment returns. I do believe that it is a win-win situation. We can magnify the impacts and the amount of the funds. The private sector, when it gets engaged or more engaged, can manage the risk and return equation to be in line with market expectations. And more importantly, I think, the forest can be restored and conserved, and the people that live there, oh my God, and the people that live in and from the forest can have a better life. This is essential to reach our common goals. Yeah. Okay. Let me get my earring then.
Okay. Good. Excellent. A few closing observations on my side. I think one thing that seems increasingly clear on this agenda is that there is a big win-win proposition here. But it does require us all to move, as Bas said, out of our comfort zones. There is a return. This is essentially, as I can understand it, partly about innovation, but to a very large extent about the risk. We have a very rich risk profile. It's partly real and partly perceived, and it needs to be addressed. So it needs to be mitigated, but it also needs to be brought down over time. That is quite crucial. And of course, to do that, I think forest countries should have in mind that the right set of policies, regulatory measures, enforcement, well-designed flows of public finance, as Claudia mentioned, is essential for the speed and scale with which this will happen. But all of us also have to create, as Heidi reminded us, the structures that provide the scale and the risk mitigation instruments to make this viable in the short term. And then over time, as investors get more comfortable with the investment propositions, that will be less necessary and we will be more mainstream, so to speak. So the combination of proving the case and improving the regulatory environment, I guess, is is the essential thing. This is not new stuff, but it is quite crucial nonetheless. The pipeline development, I think we agreed that there is a gap there. Most likely, I think we can infer from the discussion that we probably have a public goods situation. There will be a need for public money to drive that in the early phases. At NICFI, we are working on that, and I know our colleagues in other countries are also thinking hard about how to do that in a way that spends public money efficiently. And lastly, as Nanno reminded us, we need to show that it works. And the potential price here for first movers, whether they be countries creating the frameworks or companies daring to move out of the comfort zone, investors daring to move out of their comfort zone, the price potentially is huge. Because as the Business and Development Commission illustrated, the value creation potential for delivering on climate goals and SDGs in the land use sectors are massive. We are talking hundreds of billions. So the value proposition is there, but grasping it will require us to move together in a large degree. There will be 2 special lunch presentations. The Green Climate Fund will have a presentation on leveraging finance for RED+ results-based payments. That's in the Lofoten room. And then there is Colombia's integrated strategy to control deforestation and manage forests, achievements and challenges in a post-conflict context at the Scandinavia scene. So that should be 2 very interesting presentations. For those who need a mental break, there is a sit-down lunch served in the Holberg restaurant and brasserie. Lastly, could you please join me in a applause for our brilliant panel? And thank you to the audience for attending and posing very, very good questions. And thank you to Systemic for helping organize this session. And I give you 1 minute and 18 seconds of your life back. Thank you.